Now, some may say I haven't been on this earth very long yet, but as I close in on my 3rd decade here, there are some things I've come to notice, some important patterns that I've recognized about human nature and the development of civilization. A pattern, as you guys can see, is something that happens in a regular and repeated way. One pattern in particular that I want to focus this talk on is that of education. Education is something that runs deep. Education has permeated every single century, continent, and culture that's ever existed. Education, the transfer of knowledge from one person to another, is a very natural and necessary process. In fact, it's essential to our ability to not only survive, but thrive and flourish. And it's for this reason that education is something people fight to have access to. Education is something people pick up and move across town to get closer to. Education is something that people save their entire lives to pay for. Education is something that we all think we can have to secure a great job. And in my case, and maybe perhaps many of you in the audience, education is also something that people build their entire lives around. But there's something critically important we all must understand about education. Everything we know it to have been up to this point, we created. I'll say that again. Everything we know education to be up to this point, we human beings have created. The institutions of learning, the curriculum, the degrees, the roles of student, teacher, administrator. It didn't just fall from the sky. Education is a social construct that we created. We've decided what the most important information is to pass on, and we've also decided the delivery mechanism we think is best to get that information forward. But I dare to ask, is it working? Is what we've created the education system to be working? I think the best place to find this answer is in the outcomes we've produced to date. When students enter a school system, they're all in the same class, but sooner rather than later, testing begins. Those students that test proficient or advanced, they're put off on one path, the path of, say, for instance, gifted classes. Those students that score below basic, they're put on another path, probably one that consumes of remedial training. What happens, though, more times than not, is that these paths never cross again. And those in the remedial track never really get a fair chance at catching up. But the saddest part of it all is that some of them never even make it to the destination. High school dropout rates in this country are absolutely atrocious. Every year, 1.2 million high school students drop out. That's one student every 26 seconds. Couple that with suspension rates, and you have an entire youth population that are leaving the school system and oftentimes going directly into the prison system. If you haven't yet researched it, I would highly recommend you look up the school-to-prison pipeline. It's a very real and scary thing. But what about the teachers, you may be wondering? Surely the teachers are here to fix everything. Now, coming as a teacher myself, I definitely firmly believe that teachers are the, arguably, most important factor in a student's trajectory and personal development. But the fact of the matter is that most teachers are overworked, overwhelmed, and underpaid. So how much of a factor can they play if they're not sticking around? Within 5 years, 50%, 50% of all new teachers leave the profession. And you may be wondering about those students that were on that fast track to success, the ones who graduated from high school. You're probably thinking, well, they're surely set up for success for the rest of their lives. But who's really thinking like that anymore? Honestly, How much is a high school degree worth nowadays? What these students are finding is that they now have to go into debt, taking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars out in student loans in order to acquire that higher degree that's supposed to set them up for this decent job. What they find oftentimes is that even though they go and aspire to that higher degree, once they have it, that higher degree has now become the new high school degree. And there's even another stage you have to get to, even more loans you have to get. It's a vicious cycle. And I could go on and on and on about the outcomes we've produced so far with the system we've created. I could talk about how the system we've created is really skewed against low-income minority students. I could talk about how arts and creativity are being stripped out of classrooms every day. I could talk about how the lack of physical activity and the mass feeding of processed foods to the students have created an obesity epidemic we've never seen before. I could perhaps talk about how the students with special needs still aren't being properly serviced, even in 2015. I could talk about how these schools, unfortunately, have become breeding grounds for bullying, violence, and even suicide. I could go on and on and on about some of the outcomes we're producing because of the system we've set up. But I'll stop there. I'll stop. And I'll ask you, how are you feeling about what I just shared? Knowing that this is a system we've created, we've bought into, we've perpetuated. Maybe you're feeling surprised by some of the things I've shared, perhaps angry, maybe even sad. I know that's how I feel. But Mandela, what about all the good? What about all the good that this system has created? Surely it can't be all bad. I would say I absolutely agree with you. I mean, just look at you. Just look at me. Just look at everyone in this room. Most of us have gone through this system, and we turned out all right, didn't we? Many of us in this very room have even taught in this system, and we're darn proud of the impact we made on our students' lives. But you can't overlook the facts. The fact of the matter is that there are still too many people outside of this room who have not benefited from this system. People could even argue that this system has downright hurt these people. And in my opinion, that's enough to get us to rethink the system, to create a better system. And so my job here today is to get you fired up. I'll say it again. My job here today is to get you fired up. I want you to have a breakthrough right now. I want you to envision possibilities that never were before. I want you to set aside your limiting beliefs, your old paradigms, and step into the possibilities of a better future. A future that gives as many people as possible access to a quality educational experience. Access to becoming fully realized human beings. Access to being great contributors to society. But you're going to have to do something really important first. You're going to have to become an entrepreneur. Now, I'm not talking about an entrepreneur in the sense of Mark Zuckerberg, drop out of school, build an app, save the world kind of entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship that I'm talking about is the entrepreneur that already lives inside each and every one of you. Entrepreneurship is a mindset. It's an empowering mindset. It's a belief. It's believing that you are not just a cog in the wheel, that you can affect the wheel. You can innovate the wheel. You can make a better wheel. So what I'm going to do right now is walk you through 5 simple things that I think you can do to start developing a more entrepreneurial mindset as you go about thinking how we can fix this education system. Number 1, question things. Everything starts with a question. And risk being called crazy. It's not such a bad thing. Every great entrepreneur dares to challenge, push back on the status quo. Every great entrepreneur knows that in order to create a better future, you have to first question today. In the 1980s, all the way up to the early 2000s, a guy, maybe you've heard of him, Steve Jobs, he fully pushed back on the idea of what a computer was, what it could be. He pushed back on what an MP3 was, what it could be. He also pushed back on, the things in all of your pockets, the cell phone. And we now have him to thank for our beautiful MacBooks, our iPhones, and our tablets. I'll give you another example. 1907. It was when the first taxi cabs were imported from France to New York City. 2009. It was when Uber, a ride-sharing service, launched in San Francisco. If anyone in here is good at math, you would know that that's over 100 years difference from when one system of public transportation was set up, and it's been going on and on and on, and someone had the nerve. A couple guys had the nerve to challenge it. There's a better way to do this. And obviously, if you've been in an Uber, you know what that experience is like. But again, they challenged a system that was set up for a century, and they're making it work. Number 2, get inspired. At this point, us modern humans, scientists say, we've been around for about 200,000 years. That's 200,000 years people, such as you and I, have already been doing stuff. They've been trying new things. They've been innovating. Some of them have worked, some of them haven't. I mean, it really runs the gamut here. But just think about it. That's 200,000 years worth of stuff that you can get inspiration from, that you can learn from, that you can build upon. So I challenge you, next time you're in a bookstore, go down a different aisle you haven't been before. Expose yourself to something someone else has already contributed to the world. It just might be that spark you needed. I challenge you to scour the internet. Do a Google search for something maybe you've been curious about, but you never really took the time to sit down and be exposed to. I challenge you to get out of this room later on and go sit in on alternative learning experiences. How are other people doing education? Is there something we can take away from it and apply? Number 3, this is a really, really, really important one. You have to decide what you want. Not what I told you, not what else anyone else said up here today. What do you want? What do you believe? What do you think is a great educational experience? You have to get clear on where you stand. So you went out and did all this research, right? Curiosity is piqued. You're thinking, the wheels are turning, but you got to decide, where do you stand? What are you willing to go to bat for? I'll give you an example. 12 times J.K. Rowling was rejected when she tried to get her book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, published. 12 no's she had to overcome to get the book that would then lead to a series, one of the highest grossing of all time. And imagine if she would have quit. I mean, of course, the bookstores probably would have been a little less crowded during the holidays, right? Might have saved you a couple headaches. But in reality, why didn't she quit? And in my opinion, it's because she was a woman with a made-up mind. She decided what she believed, like she believed, like she believed, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way or deter her off of that path. Number 4, take action. To know and not to do is really not to know. It's going to take work. Anything worth having is worth working for, but you have to do the work. You can't just go out and put your dreams out on paper, hang them up in your wall. What is the work you're backing it up with? Dallas Mavericks owner, Mark Cuban. I don't know if you know this, but his very first business, before he had this empire, everything he did to go on and affect the world, his very first business, you know what he decided to do? Not to take a vacation and not to take it for 7 whole years. Jeff Bezos, he's the CEO of Amazon. In his early days, he always talks about how him and his co-founders would stay up till 3 a.m. every single day to make sure those books got shipped out. What do these two gentlemen have in common? They both took massive action. They recognized if anything's going to happen, they got to depend on themselves to make it happen. No excuses. And lastly, enlist others. It takes 2 flints to make a fire. It takes 2 flints to make a fire. That's one of my favorite quotes because I think it so eloquently emphasizes the importance of utilizing resources outside of oneself. Every single entrepreneur I mentioned did not get to where they are by themselves. They recognized the importance of enlisting others in a vision. They found people who believed what they believed. They found people who had complementary skill sets to their own. They found people who they could connect the person's personal mission with a broader collective vision, and they locked arms and they got to work. So as I wrap up here, I want to remind you of a couple things. Number 1, education is key to our survival. Education is key to our ability to not just thrive, but reach our greatest potential. The education system we've set up to date, some of it's working, but some of it's not. Some people are benefiting, but not everybody. Today I made my case for why I believe education needs entrepreneurs. Today I made my case for the 5 things I think anybody can do to get started on getting them set on that path. And just imagine, what if we all left here today really ready to get started? What if just 10 of us took action? Surely 10 could turn into 100. 100 could turn into 1,000. 1,000 could turn into 1,000,000. 1,000,000 could turn into a movement, and a movement of entrepreneurs all working to improve education. That could surely change the world. But what if that doesn't happen? Imagine that. What if you all leave here today uninspired, unmotivated, unwilling to take any action? What would our world look like? I surely hope we do not have to find out. I surely do hope there is someone in here who's ready to step up and be that entrepreneur. Thank you.